My mother-in-law demanded that my husband take the child for a paternity test, and the results showed that the child was not biologically related to him. To prove my innocence, I went through genetic testing myself. After giving birth, I lay on the hospital bed, half asleep, as I faintly heard my mother-in-law say to my husband, "James, we have to do it. I just don't trust her. Mom, keep it down. Don't let Sophia hear." My husband tried to stop her, but my mother-in-law wouldn't back down. "So what if she hears? You still have to take the child for a paternity test. Only then will I feel safe." I can't help but think this child doesn't look like one of our lists. Hearing my mother-in-law say that, I suddenly opened my eyes. "Mom, what are you saying? How could the child not be James's? You're at home every day. Have I ever done anything wrong to James? Don't you know? My son is always away from home. If I'm not watching you, what if one day you cheat on him? But this fish trying to flirt with others, no matter how much I watch, it won't change anything. How can it be that after being married to James for 5 years and never conceiving, you get pregnant the moment you go back from a class reunion?" My mother-in-law shouted from inside the hospital bed, as if she wanted everyone to know that I had cheated. I looked at James, but his eyes clearly showed fear and distrust, which hurt me deeply. This was the man who once said he would be with me for life, the man I left my parents for. For him, I gave up on the good job my parents found for me, abandoned a comfortable life in the big city to live in his hometown, a small remote county. For him, I failed to honor my duties as a daughter. He said his father had died young and his mother raised him alone with great difficulty, hoping that I would take care of her well. So, over the years of our marriage, I rarely visited my parents and stayed by his mother's side. For him, even though my mother-in-law was difficult to get along with, I accepted it all because she was his mother, and I loved the family as a whole. But what I didn't expect was that my blind tolerance would only lead to their growing suspicion of me. "If we have to do it, then if the child turns out to be James's, you must apologize," I said coldly, changing my usual submissive attitude towards my mother-in-law, because I knew for sure that the child belonged to my husband. My mother-in-law looked at my confident expression and hesitated. However, her usual domineering personality made her unwilling to give up immediately. "Fine, I'll go along with you." So in order to verify his son's paternity, my mother-in-law and my husband took him for a paternity test the day after I gave birth, to get the results quickly. Frugal as she usually was, my mother-in-law even paid for an expedited test. 3 days later, a piece of DNA test results was thrown in front of me. My husband angrily said, "Explain clearly what happened." Seeing their angry expressions, I picked up the test results and saw that the child had no biological connection to my husband. How could this be? For a moment, I was at a loss. At that moment, my mother-in-law spoke up. "I knew this woman couldn't be trusted. You always come to her defense. How can someone as beautiful as her endure loneliness and stay single for you?" My mother-in-law's provocation only made my husband angrier. He glared at me and the child before storming out of the ward. As soon as he left, my mother-in-law followed him. I winced at the incision from my cesarean section and struggled to get up, heading towards the nurse's station. "How did you manage to get out of bed? Where are your family members?" the nurse asked, concerned. I grabbed her hand firmly. "I need to see the doctor." The nurse saw my urgent expression and tried to comfort me. "Your cesarean section wound hasn't healed yet. You shouldn't stand for too long. Go back to rest. I'll call a doctor for you." Hearing the nurse's words, I thought about my son still in the hospital and nodded before slowly walking back to the room. A few minutes later, the attending physician entered the room. "Are you feeling all right?" I gently shook my head and then took out the paternity test results. "Doctor, how is it possible that my child has no blood relation to my husband? I haven't done anything wrong to him. Could it be that your hospital made a mistake? Or did you mix up the babies?" As I spoke, I burst into tears in indignation. The middle-aged female doctor took the report and after reading it said, "I'll check the surveillance footage to see if there was any confusion with the baby." I nodded and kept saying thank you over and over again. 5 hours later, the female doctor returned to the room. "My colleagues and I reviewed all the footage from your delivery day. We found no evidence of a mix-up." I don't believe it. I want to check it myself. I struggled to get up again. The doctor couldn't stop me and had to help me walk towards the monitoring room. After hours of searching, I didn't find what I was looking for. I collapsed into a chair in the monitoring room, unable to cry. At that moment, one of the young male doctors speaking along said, "I read about a case where if the father is a chimera, There will be no blood relation between him and the child. In this situation, a genetic test is necessary. Hearing his words, my heart, which had been full of hope, sank again. Where can I get this genetic test? Our hospital, the doctor answered. I rushed back to the room to call James. Since he stormed out in the morning, he hadn't come back, nor had his mother. Half an hour later, they both arrived at the room. After hearing my story, James looked at me with pain. The paternity test proves that the child is not mine. Why do you need to find reasons to cover up? I haven't done anything wrong to you. Why don't you believe me? I shouted. His mother saw me being angry at her precious son and immediately started criticizing him. Clearly, you're the one who made a mistake. How can you blame others? We won't do this test or any other tests with you in the future, son. Let's go. With that, she pulled James and they were about to leave. Don't leave. I must have this genetic test done, I said determinedly. Perhaps my firm expression scared James. He looked at his mother and agreed to come to the hospital for a genetic test the next day. Then, he and his mother left the room without even looking at my son once. The hospital, sensing the seriousness of the situation, expedited the issuance of the test results. The following morning, I received the result. Looking at the clear conclusion on the report that my son and husband were biologically related, my tears blurred my vision. I picked up my phone and slowly dialed James's number. What else is there to talk about? James's voice was clearly displeased on the other end of the line. I bit back my resentment and said coolly, the test results are out. Come to the hospital. For a moment, there was silence. After a while I heard, got it. They both came to the room again. As soon as they entered the ward, James's mother started complaining. What about the results? Let me see them. I glared at them coldly for a few seconds and then handed over the report. After reading the report, they exchanged a look. Immediately, his mother put on an excited expression. Where is my grandson? Grandma is here to see you. As she spoke, she looked towards me, picked up my son, and held him as if she were a kind grandmother. James also came closer and accompanied his mother in watching the sleeping baby in her arms. Watching their performance, I really wanted to curse them out loud. After a few minutes, James finally remembered that I was sitting on the hospital bed. He rubbed his hands awkwardly and said, Honey, you must be tired. I glanced at him lightly without responding. His mother looked at me and then told James, when I gave birth to you, I could get out of bed the next day. Sophia has been in the hospital for a few days. She can leave tomorrow, Mom. She had a cesarean section. The doctor said she should stay longer to recover properly. James argued, they're just trying to scam your money nowadays. People are so spoiled that they want to stay in the hospital even after having a baby. His mother retorted as soon as she heard James disagree with her in front of me. Everything will be according to my wishes. James was about to say more, but I immediately took over his words. I had enough of this mother-son duo. Getting out of the hospital earlier would be better so that I could start planning for my future sooner. Being suppressed by her for so long, I didn't want to live like this anymore, perhaps not expecting me to comply so well. His mother glanced at me suspiciously and then went to play with the already awake baby. The next day, after being discharged and returning home, James talked non-stop in the bedroom, trying to exonerate himself and his mother. I listened for a while and then said softly, Stop talking. I don't blame you or your mom, really? James asked, relieved. I nodded lightly. James went forward and held my hand. I knew my wife was always so understanding. Am getting tired. Want to rest. James happily left after hearing this. As soon as he left, I wiped the hand he just held with a tissue. On the surface, I maintained our previous relationship, but privately, I started looking into divorce procedures. After the postpartum period, I proposed divorce to James. Why? We're doing well and we have a son. Why do you want a divorce? It wasn't until then that James understood why I wanted a divorce. I felt sad about having once loved someone like him. From the moment you stopped trusting me and started doubting me, I gave up on you completely, I said softly. James suddenly understood. So you were just pretending to forgive me? When did you become so cunning? The one who made the mistake was clearly him, yet now he was shifting blame. This marriage had to end. I took out the prepared divorce agreement and said coolly, Take a look. If there are no objections, sign your name. James didn't even glance at it before preparing to tear it up. At that moment, his mother entered our bedroom. Wait a minute, I want to see what conditions this woman has set. After reading it, she threw the divorce agreement in my face and said, All the money in the house is earned by my son. What right do you have to demand a share? It's marital property, so I'm entitled to it. Besides, over the years, I've been working as well. Why should all the property be considered his earnings? I retorted upon hearing her words. You earn that money and barely manage to feed yourself without my son. You'd have blown in the wind long ago, she boasted arrogantly. I walked past her, looking at James, and said, This is a matter between me and James. Please don't interfere, Rebel. Rebel? Son, look at this woman you insisted on marrying. Now she's against me. You must divorce her. His mother cried and ranted to James. James clenched his fists and jabbed them into the wall before viciously saying, Sophia, I won't divorce you. With that, he stormed out. Seeing James leave, his mother followed suit. I knew it wouldn't be easy to get James to agree to a divorce, after all. Where else would he find such a foolish woman willing to endure and help take care of him after their mom? I was prepared for a long battle, but I never imagined that 3 days later, James actually agreed to the divorce. While I was ecstatic, he proposed a condition. You can only choose between the property and the son. For his unreasonable demands, I instinctively refused. That's impossible. The property that belongs to me will be mine, and I won't give up on my son either. Well, just drag this out then. Hope you don't regret it, he said at the time without paying much attention. It wasn't until a few days later that I slowly understood the true meaning of his words. The next morning, James went out to drive his car. On the third morning after he left, when I woke up, I found my son missing. I thought it was his grandmother who had taken him out. I left the bedroom and discovered even she wasn't there. I quickly called his grandmother's elderly phone, but it said, The number you've dialed is currently turned off. I then dialed James' phone. James, where are mom and son? If you don't agree to my conditions, you'll never see your son again in this lifetime, he replied on the phone. Hearing that, I became anxious. You can't do this. Why not? I'm his father. She took him, and even if police come, there's nothing they can do, James replied arrogantly on the phone. After hanging up, I thought a lot. I could drag out the divorce process, but in the end, it would affect my son. For my son's sake, I chose to compromise. I want the son. The property is yours. I called James again, exhaustedly saying. The next day, James returned with his son and mother. After drafting the divorce agreement, we went to the civil office to finalize the divorce. With our luggage packed, I left James' house with my son. To save money, I rented a one-bedroom apartment. Caring for my son made my previous job unsuitable to earn a living. I started looking for online projects that could bring in income. I had considered going back to my hometown, but since the breakup with my parents was so decisive, I didn't feel comfortable returning. With very little money left in my pocket, I wondered how long I could manage. I needed to find work quickly, otherwise, I didn't know how to continue living. As they say, there's no such thing as an impossible road. 3 days after the divorce, I finally found a part-time job online that involved typing for others. The pay was based on the amount completed, and if I worked hard, I could earn 3,000 yuans a month. With this basic income, my son and I finally had a place to settle in. 2 months later, my son developed a fever. When I took him to the hospital, I saw James' mother and son, along with a young girl. They stood on either side of the girl, their faces showing uncontainable joy. Seeing them, I held my son and prepared to leave, as I really didn't want any trouble, but sharp-eyed grandmother immediately spotted me and called out, Sophia, why are you running so fast? I had to turn around, give them a slight smile, and then prepare to leave. We came here for Grace's prenatal checkup. What about you? Grandmother wouldn't let go of the chance to talk to me. My son has a fever. I'm taking him to see a doctor. Hearing that my son was sick, as his father, James was about to walk over to see when he was stopped by grandmother. It was you who insisted on having the child. How could you leave without bringing him? I really don't know how you can be a mother. Grandmother scolded me. The girl named Grace heard grandmother's words and held her hand. Mom, it's not worth getting upset over this kind of thing. In the future, I will take good care of my child and won't be like some people. Grace is still so obedient. We won't get angry. After hearing new wife's words, grandmother's face was as bright as a flower, then turned around and left with Grace. James stood there, unable to leave or stay put. At this moment, grandmother turned back. James, come over and help your wife. Hearing his mother's words, James looked at me and followed them away. Throughout the entire process, he didn't even look at his son once. I never thought that James, who was initially unwilling to divorce, would quickly agree to it. Today, seeing them, I finally understood why there was such a big difference, since he could find a young and beautiful girl who also wanted to have children with him. Why waste any more time on me? In reality, all the vows and sweet words were false. Old love could never compare to new infatuation. I thought we would never have any further contact with them as a family, but 1 month later, James actually called me. "Sophia, do you have time? I want to talk to you." "No time. And there's nothing to discuss between us." After saying this, I was about to hang up the phone. "Don't hang up the phone. I really can't find anyone to talk to," James pleaded on the other end of the line. Hearing this, I found it funny. He had just gotten married a short time ago. How could he not have anyone to talk to? I said, "If you have anything to say, go talk to your wife. I'm just your ex-wife." With that, I directly hung up, but since then, he started calling me several times a day, which I didn't answer. He then began sending WeChat messages filled with regretful words. His actions made me frustrated and annoyed, so I decided to block his number. Unbelievably, a few days later, James showed up outside the apartment I rented. When I heard knocking on the door, I saw it was him through the peephole and didn't open it. However, he wouldn't give up and kept pounding on the door. To avoid complaints from the neighbors, I had no choice but to open the door. As soon as I opened it, he came in and hugged me, smelling his heavy body odor. I quickly pushed him away. From his disjointed storytelling, I learned that his new wife spent lavishly at home, treating him like a servant. The slightest inconvenience would result in physical abuse, making him realize how good my treatment had been. In the end, I removed his number from the blacklist and promised not to call him again if he left. Finally, I managed to send him away. I didn't expect that such an unintentional action of mine would cause me so much trouble. After that day, James started calling me every day with simple greetings or chatting about my son. Sometimes, he would also send funny videos over. Despite his actions, my heart was no longer stirred by him. I only thought of him as the father of my child and a former classmate, but my thoughts didn't mean others felt the same way. So when James' wife came with her mother to my door and scolded me for destroying their family, I realized I had made another mistake. I hadn't opened the door before because I thought they would leave after venting, but as their insults became more and more vicious, I couldn't hold it in any longer and finally opened the door. "All is not as you think. James and I have nothing," I explained calmly. When my ex-mother-in-law saw me, she rushed forward like lightning and slapped me across the face. "How could I ever think you were honest? Turns out you're an unrepentant slut. After getting a divorce, you still come running after your ex-husband. Don't talk nonsense." When did I entice James? It was he who actively approached me, I retorted. Then I saw James rushing to my side. Upon hearing the commotion, I immediately called out to him, "James, explain what's going on here." Upon hearing my words, James didn't speak, but his facial expression led everyone to believe it was I who enticed him. Finally, it was the staff from the street office who persuaded James and his family to leave. After this incident, I had no choice but to move away because I couldn't bear the gossiping of my neighbors. Without a doubt, I blacklisted James' phone number again. Besides helping people copy text online, I found 2 new projects that earned me about 10,000 yuan per month. I planned to save up enough money and make a down payment on a house in this small town next year. I was actively planning for my future life, unaware that someone else had their eyes set on me. That day, I was busy with some work when a number that seemed familiar but wasn't saved in my contacts called. I picked up the call and heard my ex-mother-in-law's voice. "Is Sophia there?" "It's me, Mom." The name Sophia was what James' mother had called me before our marriage. Since then, she had always addressed me directly. Hearing her use this term now made me realize that something bad must be happening. "Sorry, but I only have one mom, and it's not you. Besides, there isn't much we can talk about," I said coldly, hanging up the call. But she called back again. To find out why she was contacting me, I picked up the call once more. "Sophia, I know I did wrong to you before. Here, I'm apologizing to you. Can you come to the hospital? I have something important to discuss with you," my ex-mother-in-law said on the phone. After hanging up, I thought for a moment and took my son to the hospital. No one would help me take care of him. Wherever we went, he had to go with us. Following my ex-mother-in-law's instructions, I found her in the ward lying on the bed. It turned out she had fallen at home. "What is it? Just tell me," I said impatiently as I looked at her. Although seeing her in such a condition was somewhat pitiful, thinking of all the bad things she had done to me before made me feel indifferent towards her. My mother-in-law kept evading the question, hesitating and stammering. From her behavior, I felt that there wasn't good news. "If you don't say anything, I'm leaving," I said, carrying my son to leave. "Oh, Sophia, please don't go. There's something I need to tell you," my ex-mother-in-law pleaded as she saw me about to leave. "I fell and am in the hospital now. Can't you come and take care of me?" Hearing such an outrageous request from her mouth, all I wanted to do was laugh. I thought I was that person who used to submit to their bullying before. I laughed coldly at her. "Don't mention your daughter-in-law. Every time I hear about her, it makes me angry." "Don't talk about her. Every time I mention her, I get upset," she said, hesitating again. I stared at her, urging her to continue. Maybe truly in need of my help, she finally mustered up the courage to say, "The child she's carrying isn't James. She actually tried to deceive us now. James is divorcing her." Hearing this, I felt a sigh of relief indeed. Evil people have their own ways of dealing with each other. Even though I couldn't personally deal with them, someone would take care of it. I smiled at her and said, "Ask your son to hire a nurse for you. I can't possibly take care of you anymore this time." I really left. As I walked away, I heard my ex-mother-in-law calling from behind, but since this no longer concerned me, I rarely paid attention. The next day, James somehow found me again. After all, the county was not big. "It wasn't difficult to find someone if you were determined, Sophia. Please help me one last time. Go to the hospital and take care of Mom for me. I'm so busy with work and my divorce that I'm completely stressed out," he pleaded as soon as we met. Seeing his pleading face, I felt only annoyance. "We're divorced. These matters have nothing to do with me. Please don't keep coming to me, regardless of what. I'm still the father of your son. The person in the hospital is his grandmother. Are you really so heartless? Don't you care about how your son will feel in the future?" James said harshly when his pleading failed. It was one thing not to mention his son. Talking about him made me even more furious. "How dare you mention your son? He's already grown up. Have you ever paid a single dime for his upbringing? Have you ever looked at him properly?" James, feeling guilty, slowly lowered his head. After pushing him out the door, I closed it. I thought that after saying this much, even those with any sense of face would stop bothering me, but the next day, he came again. This time, he came to borrow money, asking for 30,000 right away. Hearing those words come out of his mouth, I felt completely lost. "When we were getting divorced, you used our son to threaten me and forced me to leave him childless. Now, with the money I find each month barely covering my own and my son's living expenses, where would I get any more? You don't have it. You can ask your parents for help." He actually thought about going after my parents. I found it laughable. "James, you know that back then to marry you, I cut off all ties with my parents. Over the years, we've had no contact at all. Do you really think I would have the face to ask them for money?" He fell silent for a moment and said, "Regardless of what, they are still your parents and wouldn't stand by and do nothing when they know you're in trouble. Please try it. I beg you." Seeing how desperate he was to borrow money from me, I sensed something wasn't right. "Where is all the money you've saved over these years? And why are you borrowing so much money in such a hurry?" James, seeing that I was willing to ask him questions, thought his chances were good and immediately said, "Grace tricked me out of all my money. Now, Mom's medical expenses amount to 30,000. Since I can't think of any other way, I had no choice but to come to you. Consider our marriage. Please help me." At that moment, my son started crying in the room. I went to pick him up, and James followed. Watching his intense gaze on the child made me suddenly recall how he used our son to threaten me before we divorced. Afraid of repeating history, I had no choice but to calm him down first. "I'll call my parents right away and let you know their response tomorrow morning. Call them now," he urged anxiously. I checked the time and said, "They're still at work this late, so it's inconvenient to talk. Let's do it tonight." James thought for a moment and agreed with me. As soon as he left, I quickly booked a flight that evening and contacted my landlord to check out of the apartment. When the landlord arrived, he said I had breached the contract and deducted the deposit we had paid at the time. Compared to James's constant nagging and the safety of my son, 1,000 yuan in deposit was nothing. After packing my belongings, I took a taxi to the airport. When the plane landed in my friend's city at p.m. that night, I felt relieved. The next morning, as expected, James called me. As soon as I picked up, He asked, Sophia, did you call your parents? Did you manage to borrow the money? James, where do you get the confidence to think it'll still help you? I hope you never call me again and that we never see each other. In the phone call, I spoke calmly. What do you mean? Didn't you promise me yesterday? James asked anxiously when he heard what I said on the other end. I gently pressed the hang-up button and took out my SIM card to throw it away, letting everything from our past disappear like that phone card after living in my friend's city for 2 years. I finally returned to my hometown with my son. My parents are old, and I don't want to lose the opportunity to spend my later years with them because of my mistake in the past. Occasionally, hearing classmates talk about James's life, they say he's not doing well now. But all of that is none of my concern anymore, because ever since he started suspecting me, the end of our marriage was already predetermined. The story ends here.